This is WDNA 88.9 FM and WDNA.org. And today we are with the Frost Jazz Octet with Dante Luciani and his group. It's a really interesting group and a larger ensemble than we're used to here at the radio show. So we're excited to present the music. This first tune is entitled Out of the Past, composed and arranged by Benny Golson. Thanks for tuning in to WDNA 88.9 FM. This is the Frost Jazz Hour. And for those of you who are just now tuning in, today we have the Frost Jazz Octet, directed by Professor Dante Luciani.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's a really interesting experience playing in such a large ensemble at 11 a.m., yeah?
Any ensemble is 11 a.m.
Yeah, at 11 a.m. So the first tune, it was composed and arranged by Benny Golson, Out of the Past. Now this second tune, Strayhorn, I'm guessing there's a little bit of a story about that one.
Yeah, and incidentally, the first tune, just so we can stay current, we had a solo by Alan Sharp on tenor, and Vinny Iaquinta on the trombone, and Jitan Zhang on the guitar. And let me just preface my next part of my speech here by saying that all of these arrangements were brought in by members of the octet. With the exception of the one we just played. That was one I had in my library, but they've been active arranging this semester some wonderful, wonderful pieces that you'll hear today. The second piece you heard that featured Jackson Talamy on the baritone saxophone was entitled Strayhorn, and it's an ode to Billy Strayhorn, of course, the famous collaborator with Duke Ellington, wonderful writer and arranger in his own right. And there's a little bit of a story behind this. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring my bassist here, and he's gonna introduce himself, and he's gonna tell us a little bit about this arrangement and an arrangement that we're gonna be doing a little later on in the program.
All right. Hello, I'm Nate Wilson. That last Song for Strayhorn, it was composed by Jerry Mulligan, but it was arranged by my grandfather, Ian Polster. He was a very prolific composer, arranger, performer, educator, who sadly passed away recently. And I'm trying to honor him a little bit by playing a few of his arrangements. He arranged for really every type of ensemble you can think of, but a lot of what he did was playing with this octet called the Principal Players, and there's this huge box of arrangements in his house that were just all for octet, and I happened to be in this ensemble at the time, so I figured I'd pull a few out. So yeah, that was Song for Strayhorn, and after the next song we're playing, Here's That Rainy Day, was also arranged by Ian Polster, my grandfather.
What a perfect coincidence. So when did you find this? I kind of almost want to imagine, how did this happen? You were at home and then you saw this big box of music? How did that happen?
So when my parents and my mom's siblings were going through my grandfather's house in Ohio, it was just full of music, just like strewn all about the place. It took them months to just like find all of it and organize all of it. And by the end of that process, that's when they had the box full of the Principal Players' music. And so when I was in this ensemble this semester, I just like asked my mom, yeah, what arrangements should we do?
Send it over, yeah. That's great. So that one was Strayhorn, and then later, at the end of the set, Here's That Rainy Day. That would be the next one. And did you grow up with your grandfather? Were you close to him? Were you able to play music with him?
I was not that close with him, but just the amount of music he created, he passed that down to my mom, who passed it down to my sibling and me. And yeah, I don't know. I've definitely felt his influence my whole life, for sure.
That's beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have a background with other musical family members because I don't. So I always wonder what that's like.
Well, interestingly enough, I have no musicians in my family except for my great uncle, who I found out was played banjo with the Paul Whiteman Band back in the 1920s. And that's the only connection to music that I have as far as musicians being in my family. I think my parents were musically inclined and they loved music, but you know, I guess fate had a different plan for them as far as what they did for their livelihood. So yeah, I was the musician in the family. Basically.
Right.
How
And now
about
you're
you?
passing it. No, my dad is tone deaf.
Well, you definitely didn't take after him because you're a wonderful vocalist.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So what are some of the gifts I would say that you're passing down to this particular ensemble? I know every year you have a different pair of students with different needs, and so you're working on arranging. What else have you been working on with these students during the semester?
Well, I think one of the main goals of the Frost Jazz Octet is it's kind of an introductory ensemble for rhythm section players and horn players to really get into the minutia of learning an arrangement, of blending together. We talk a lot about phrasing and articulation, and it kind of sets them up so that when they move on and get into some of our really wonderful large ensembles, the big bands, you know, the Frost Jazz Orchestra, the Studio Jazz Band, the Latin Jazz Orchestra, that they're ready to kind of jump in there and start functioning well as section players and as musicians in a group. The more people you have in a group, the more it becomes a matter of personal interaction and being able to work together efficiently, being able to deal with any personalities that might be in the ensemble. It goes much beyond music when it comes to playing in a large group. There's a lot of intrinsic value to it that carries into other aspects of your life, really, if you want to think of it that way. So, and it's amazing the difference that I always notice from the first week of the semester until now that we're maybe 6 or 7 weeks in, 6 or 7 weeks in, how everybody starts working together, and I hear them, okay, what are we going to do? Where are we going to breathe here? How are we going to play this? They start to get, the machine starts to work, and then
Right.
the gears start turning, and hopefully this will continue throughout their musical journey.
Yeah, I can definitely, and I'm sure the listeners can also hear the level of detail and dynamics that the band has demonstrated. And like I said, at 11 a.m. is definitely a feat. So we'll take a short break, and we'll be back with more music here on WDNA 88.9 FM. This is WDNA 88.9 FM with the Frost Jazz Hour. And today we are joined by the Frost Jazz Octet, directed by Professor Dante Luciani. This next tune, Can't We Be Friends, composed by Paul James. K. Swift, arranged by Jackson Talmy. That was Can't We Be Friends? On the solos there, Jackson Talmy on Barry sax, Vinny Quintana on trombone, and Adam Hallicher on trumpet. Up next, here's That Rainy Day, composed by Jimmy Van Heusen. And if you were listening earlier, this was an arrangement by our bass player's grandfather, Nathan Wilson. You know, I love the sound of the shuffling in between. They probably can't hear it or see it if they're watching, if they're listening in their cars. But for those of you who want to watch the show live, you can log on to our YouTube for WDNA. All of the shows are streamed. And I want to check in with our producer, Alberto, who is playing next week.
It's extensions.
Extensions,
Oh,
okay, great. We have Extensions one more time this season, directed by Dr. Kate Reed. So make sure you tune in next week at 11 a.m.
And if you really want to watch it live, you come down here to the
Yes.
studio.
Exactly.
We have some people here that have shown up for the concert. And I see a couple of empty chairs left over there. There are a few. And it's a really wonderful facility. I was reminiscing with Alberto when we used to do the UM Jazz Hour. I guess, I don't even know if we called it that then, but it was back in the mid 90s when you guys were at the old location. And it's amazing how far along this organization has come as far as not only as an organization that supports the arts, and I'm involved with the Litchfield Jazz Festival auditions and all those things that happen, but it's just come along physically. The space is so much more accommodating, and it's really awesome.
So you guys would tag team, yeah?
Yeah.
You both did the.
No, we did it together. Yeah, we did the show together.
We
the
need to
ori-
find those archives.
Oh, they're somewhere. They're in there somewhere. We used to joke around a lot.
I can see that.
I'm wondering if it would be PC. Whatever we used to say, Alberto, it's probably still PC.
I can't remember.
Probably not.
That
No, I'm
might
just
be.
kidding.
Get a knock at the door. That show you did in 1992 when you mentioned blah, blah, blah. But you want
So
to
what's next?
Oh,
yeah,
well,
let's
okay.
keep
I'll
going.
talk a little just for a second about
Sure.
this. This is a really interesting arrangement. Phil Wood's one of the great jazz alto saxophonists of all time, collaborating with Hal Galper, one of the most amazing jazz pianists around. This is composed by Phil and arranged by Hal, and it's kind of our barn burner, and it's called Loose Change. And we're going to hear from Adam Abdelkhalik on the alto saxophone, Adam Hallaker on trumpet, Zitan Jiang on guitar, Nate Wilson on bass, and Matt Meberg on drums. So we're going to feature a lot of people here, and we're going to blow out the carbon with Loose Change.
You are listening to WDNA 88.9 FM, the Frost Jazz Octet,
Safe.
directed by the one and only Dante Luciani. We have time for about one more tune.
Yeah. I guess before we,
20 minutes, 15 minutes.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we have time for
Yes.
more than just one tune.
well, we're going to open up the last one. So, are we on a break now?
No, we're live.
Hello, everyone. I think this is a good time, maybe before we do play our last piece, I would like to acknowledge everyone here at WDNA, Mr. De La Guerra, Ms. Garcia, and the whole crew, the sound, and all of the wonderful DJs here for having us and hosting us today. It's a real pleasure to be here, and this is a really wonderful experience for students at the U because, you know, we do so much music, we do so many concerts on campus. It's nice to get off campus and play a little bit, you know. I think it's a really important aspect of of the time that they spend here. To get out, get into town. You know, I was driving with Adam, the alto player, today on my way here. And he said, as we got close to the station, "Are we still in Coral Gables?" And I said, "Yep, we definitely are." You know, so a lot of our students, especially the undergraduates, they really don't get to get out much and see what Miami has to offer. And then I was mentioning the fact that just last week we had Calle Ocho here. You know,
Did they go? Did you go?
did any of you go to Calle Ocho? I went. I stopped by. You know, I used to, back when I was in school here in the mid-'80s, everyone played in a live band. There were probably 30 or 40 different Cuban, Puerto Rican, Colombian, salsa, merengue, you name it. And every horn player had a gig. 5 nights a week, cash, and we, you know, Calle Ocho, I think it first came into being around 1978 or 79, I believe. So this was like 84, 85. By then it was really humming along. And the opportunities that we had, I got to play with Celia Cruz, I got to play with so many great, wonderful Latin artists at the time. And that's one advantage of this city, is that we are multicultural and we have a lot of great music to experience. And for students to get out and do that, I think it's very important. So keep that in mind, gentlemen.
Yeah, I think not too long ago, I went to, I think Maria Schneider was conducting at a Frost
The
Orchestra.
HMI concert?
Yes.
That was
and
an awesome concert.
Yeah, and Whit Seidner was receiving an award. Do you remember what the award was for?
It was an outstanding alumni award, I believe.
Right.
I think he received one, and there are some others that will also receive one. And he came into town specifically for that, and I had not seen him for a while, so my wife and I got to have dinner with he and his wife, EJ, and that concert with Stephen Robinson, the tenor player. The name escapes me, but Scott Robinson was fabulous. The arrangements, the orchestra. Of course, Maria is always dynamic, and she's such a great force of nature when it comes to arranging and music in general.
I was excited that they played music from Data Lords.
Yeah.
Because I remember years ago when I was at Frost, that record was just coming out. And she's
You mean like
huge.
4 years ago?
Yeah, that's a long time for me, okay? So she was releasing that record, and she's huge on, things not being streamed and really purchasing music and how to create a way for musicians to make a living for themselves.
Right.
And so it was just great to be back at the U and witness all these new players. And I remember hearing a story about Wit, which is why I'm bringing this up, and he was talking about how back in those days when he was teaching there, that he made sure everyone, like you said, that everyone had a gig in Miami. So from your perspective, what do you think has changed in the city, or I'm not sure.
Well, this is an interesting topic. I'm glad you brought this up. We might not have enough time.
I know.
I'm going to try to be brief now. We had too much time. What has changed? The whole live music scene has changed. I mean, truth be told, in the mid-1980s, a lot of the venues, and even before that, were, for lack of a better word, they were used for money laundering, basically, for a lot of the cartels. So, horrible thing to happen, to have that in our city. However, I must say, the silver lining was we had a lot of clubs and a lot of music, just like kind of the mob back in the Vegas days. They as bad as they were, for some reason they liked live music. So we had these. Now, when we were in school, Whit Seidner gave us the opportunity to play in. We used to play shows at the Fontainebleau that he would contract. I got to play
talked
with
about that before.
Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra and Ben Vereen and Bob Hope, and all the big acts would come through, and we cut our teeth playing those shows.
Wow.
Nowadays, the difference is, I think, much more of the presence of the music is online. And as a necessity, you have to have a product out there, you have to stay up with your social media, and hopefully the regulations and the laws at some point will make it such that musicians can really make a decent living off of the revenues from streaming and similar things like that.
So what advice would you give perhaps to this ensemble who is up and coming and is going to be in the scene if they're not already?
Well, some of them already are. And my advice is, while you're in school, especially as an undergraduate, focus on getting your name out there, but focus even more on getting your you-know-what together. Use this time to practice. You have this time will not be available to you once you leave school or even go into graduate work. You won't have the time. This is the time to hone your craft and to really embrace the love of the music that you have, which is why we're here, right? We're here, like I've always tell them, what are we here to do? Have fun. That's all it's about, really. And a lot of students now are getting notoriety through competitions, jazz competitions and things like that, where they get recognized. Whereas when I was coming up, it was getting on a road band like Woody Herman or Maynard Ferguson or Buddy Rich or whatever. So it's changed.
Yeah. And if I may add my 2 cents,
Of
I
course.
would say record whenever you can.
Good point.
ASAP. Before you leave school, use the facilities, get your group of friends, and record, because then when you graduate, then you have to pay people. Unless you're friends, of course, but yeah. When you're in school, it's the best time to record, and then you have something to show for when you're trying to get gigs.
Yeah. So,
So,
where are we now? I think we got about 5 minutes left. This is going to be perfect. This last piece is composed by Ellis Marcellus, and it's arranged by our very talented trumpet player, Adam Hallaker, who's were you a freshman, Adam? Wow, these freshmen are sounding really good these days. And I'm going to let him kick it off, and I think we should have enough
yeah.
as is. If we need to extend something, I'll let you know, but let's do it as is and see what happens. Count us off, Adam. Thank you.
That's it. Thanks, guys.
That was perfect.
That was perfect.
See that? Right to the
Perfect.